And with these thoughts, I'd like to call the panelists to the podium to take this to the international perspective and look what's going on in different parts of the world. I'll start introducing you already. The first one showing up is Sushil Kumar, Senior Director of Services and Solutions for Middle East from Motorola. Welcome. Barbara Held, Dr. Barbara Held. Now I need to read it directly. Head of Directorate Operations at the German Federal Agency for Public Safety Digital Radio, BDBOS. Thank you. Antti Kauppinen, Finland, responsible for the MVNO part, Development Director, and Jed Griffin, Visiting Fellow, Australian Institute of Police Management, been with Victorian Police 31 years, and been serving in lots of operations. Really do read his CV. It's quite interesting. Please take a seat. Right. International situation. I think for the next few minutes, I'd like to ask maybe to address the public safety and broadband needs from three corners. One is on terms of needs, one is in terms of challenges, and one is then hopefully in terms of solutions. But let's get a little bit view, where are we today? Barbara, could you give us a brief, what is the situation in Germany today in terms of public safety communication?
Okay, we have our Tetra narrowband network up and running, and for almost a year now, which makes us a latecomer in the European context. It serves well all the purposes of speech, of voice communication, has very good acceptance with our users. But our users are people of this world, and they like to use the LTE devices. They want video, they want data transmission and more. And so we also have local projects ongoing on LTE. So we have a nationwide coverage and network for Tetra, and that means a network where ambulances as well as police and other rescue workers and fire brigades are integrated and communicate with each other. And we have special projects, broadband projects that are led by or special organizations, units, mostly police and some fire brigades, on the broadband matter. We don't have, as up to now, a nationwide LTE initiative or program, although there is a political decision-making process ongoing. So we are heading to one of the many models of hybrid network, but we don't know which one at this time. We don't know the solution.
So largely, well, one could say that you have probably the largest Tetra network in the world with the greatest amount of people. So it's a ship which doesn't turn overnight. It's fair to say.
No, and I mean, it is politically, it's a very difficult argumentation if you have just finalized the setup of one network to go to your politicians and say, well, we now need to set up another network. So this is a problem, although all the politicians also use 4G with their mobile phones. So at some point in time, they probably will agree that their first responders have to have the same facilities as their criminals, for example.
How about Finland? Antti?
Yes, well, we have probably one of the oldest Tetra network at least in terms of public safety in the world. Our network was finalized in 2002, and we have now gone through an extensive renewal project. And our plan is to run narrow band tetra for mission critical speeds at least until 2030, possibly. At the same time, we have a broadband service, and we function as a virtual operator onto commercial networks. We would like to have our own frequency, so we could offer better services, probably like NEDA, for example, but we tried to get that frequency from the 700 band, but it was decided in Finland that those bands will be auctioned off. So now we are developing our broadband service that is based entirely on commercial services at the moment, and my presentation that follows this panel will address that.
Good. How about Australia? I mean, a big country, different requirements, different places.
Yes, Australia is quite challenging because we've got under our constitution, the national government responsibilities, which is where our regulator sits. So they've got a focus on the national good and international relationships, which includes managing the spectrum. The ACMA are doing a fantastic job as far as trying to establish a policy position which will provide an integrated public safety communications network, if you like. They've launched a number of major inquiries so far, the next generation 000 or emergency call number, a productivity commission inquiry into public safety mobile broadband, which really found the hybrid network solutions being the most suitable for Australia. We've had a House of Reps inquiry into the smart computing and what that means for Australia. We've also had a recent inquiry in relation to collaborative intelligent transport systems. So the ACMA are doing a lot of really good work trying to set the environment which will support what we need from a public safety perspective. However, the actual delivery of public safety is a state responsibility. So the states have to find the money to invest in any network or system that we want. And as Barbara said, the key problem you've got is, and our first speaker, is about trying to sell the message to government that they should invest in a certain thing. So at the moment, across Australia, we've been transitioning across to digital LMR or PMR networks. So P25 is our default standard. From the open source documents, it looks like we've got roughly $2 billion investment in the P25 system. So as indicated by Barbara, we will have the P25 system for a long time to come. As far as public safety mobile broadband, at this stage, the key date is set is for the year 2020, where we'll have a public safety mobile broadband network. And that will be through a commercial carrier under the lanes concept, which I think is probably appropriate. We've got a very large landmass. 90% of our land is a rural or urban environment, but 99% of our population lives in cities. So we probably need the LTE or the mobile broadband within cities more so the country, but politically can't disadvantage the rural communities. So it's a difficult space we're working in. I don't think we'll have the money to buy or to build a dedicated LTE network, but the agencies are not really involved in the conversation, so we've got a lot of good work done by the regulator, by our national carriers, very active, but the actual agencies aren't that active in trying to shape the conversation going forward. And as a result, we've got a lot of siloed activities, which will cause us problems in the future. And I don't think our agencies realise how significantly the LTE or mobile broadband will change the way we do business. And I think the TCCA should be congratulating their work with Peter, with the critical control rooms work, looking at what's the future control room going to look like. Because when you go from our standard point of entry with a 000 PSTN connection on a voice and telephone to the potential which mobile broadband will give us, we really have to rethink our whole business and what we do and focus on what's the outcome to the community, so what's the value proposition, rather than just focusing on ourselves as agencies It should be the focus on the community, how we can actually protect them and provide them some value.
Okay. And then to address also the countries mentioned here on the agenda, obviously in US with FirstNet, there's the spectrum allocated, some initial funding allocated. We have been expecting for the prime contractor to be announced. It's been somewhat delayed. We thought that we would have had the information available by today, but it's likely to take a while. However, as far as I understand, one of the key challenges in US is the change of culture from going from siloed networks to something which is common, shared between different user groups. So there's a big question on trust and building collaboration on the technology use. As far as I understand, it's very similar to the previous speakers, that first of all, the mission critical voice will remain in the LMR systems. They are in place, so it's first for data, but it will gradually then develop further. On SafeNet in Korea, they have just finalized their pilot project in order to address the public safety needs, most of all triggered by some disaster related to the ferry a couple years ago, and so their plan is to have a public safety LTE covering public safety transport as well as maritime needs, but their key concern is coverage, what they are sharing, and they find that to be the most greatest challenge. How about you, Sunil? How do you see what are the challenges here in this region, now considering what's going on in different places?
Well, the challenge in this region, just like others, would be, again, it's a question of the time it takes to make a decision on what kind of a network you need. I think this region, for the most part, has decided that it will be a private network. Spectrum in most of the countries in GCC, there is at least a identification or allocation of spectrum on where it is. It's a question of rolling it out and then creating the work culture and the processes to now move from a voice-centric network to a voice and multimedia-centric network.
So what does it take actually to, on the requirement side, and what does it take to move from the voice-centric way of working to data-centric working? Barbara, what do you think? What are the key issues from shifting from voice-centric way of working to information-centric way of working?
Actually, I'm not a policeman and I'm not a firefighter, so I think the concept...
Maybe you answer from the policy perspective, and then let's get the answer from the technical perspective from Antti and from the user point of view from Ged.
I think this is a question that might meet different answers depending on just the kind of first responder organization you're talking to. Yeah. From the policy perspective, we just know that we need that kind of information. But on the other hand, I believe once we introduce LTE as defined by release 1314, we also will have to change the way our control rooms work, and maybe also have to change the way how these organizations work together. And there are very few studies around at this point in time that give you an indication on how that will work. Just like if you're, for example, we in Germany at least are using a lot of DMO, and DMO in LTE is different with the data than it is in the Tetra world. So we will have to think about that, and we just, at least in Germany, we just started, and I think for that reason, the regional projects we have that have sort of limited impact very worthwhile as sort of trials and to gain experience for later on to have a larger policy on how to introduce that.
Well, from the technical point of view, I guess the functionalities have to be ready. So, for example, release 14 and 15 of LTE have to be ready. Vendors have to be interested in making them something that the operators can buy. Then you have to have them in the radio networks that you use, and then they will probably be taken into use because there's a big driver, at least in Finland and I think in other countries, to make the field operations more efficient, to require less people to save money. So efficiency through technology is probably what has to happen, but first they have to be available. I don't think, at least in Finland, the PPDR users are going to be the driving force to make the technology happen. It will happen the other way around. It has to be available, then it will be looked into and tried out and see what we can do with that, and then it will probably take place.
Just one remark, this is very funny. He is sort of speaking about saving people like policemen, and we at this time in Germany, we are hiring more policemen, and we strategically planning to hire more people to increase the level of safety in our metropolitan areas. This is, well, due to the terror attacks, but it's also due to other things like organized crime and so forth.
So maybe the same technology solutions will provide the answer for both of you. On one side, for the other to free more people on the field, and the
and for us
one
to
side,
organize more people,
side
yeah.
for the other to save some cost. How about from you?
Thanks, Stuart. If you look at challenges, there's two aspects to it. One is the technical aspect, and one is the adaptive aspect. Now, we've got some brilliant communication engineers here at the conference over the next 2 days and back in our home countries. So from a technical perspective, if we can build the trust and the collaboration between the agencies, the government and the vendors, we can build a network up to whatever dimensions we specify and what we can afford. But the key aspect is, how do we change the behaviour of the police, fire, ambulance to do things in a new way? So we're still operating on from policing, on a policing model designed by Peel back in the 1800s. So when we're tackling serious organised crime, when we're tackling terrorism, how do we use the technology to get a position of advantage so that we actually deliver that better service? So I think that's a work in progress about really understanding the culture of police, fire and ambulance, having the whole of government arrangements for communication systems and working with commercial vendors as far as the network's concerned. If you look at the Internet of Things, that's a very big and diverse conversation. What we try to do in Australia is limit that down to what's the Internet of public safety things, so things that I need to concentrate on. So a fridge which is connected to the Internet, which tells me when to buy new milk or whatever, is not really a concern. However, so the intelligent transport systems is a key area of concern because we have roughly 2,130 people killed each year on Australian roads. The next big step in road safety is going to be through intelligent transport systems. So how can we actually be involved in the conversation, build those into our current business practice? And I think it's going to be a very rewarding but challenging process, Jerry.
Absolutely. On the industry point of view, what is it that you can bring to the table to help this transition take place?
So if you based on all the discussions that have happened since morning, one stream is coming out that public safety broadband is now gaining momentum, enabling new capabilities, but voice is still not going away. LMR is still not going away. So there has to be a certain enablement of coexistence between the two technologies, the LMR and LTE. So that interoperability coexistence is an important factor which companies like Motorola bring to the table. The other one would also be now the network is much more complex. There is capabilities that a particular vendor brings to the table, capabilities that you partner with other companies in the in the industry, and then there are capabilities or applications that the public safety agencies themselves have. So this becomes a huge integration exercise to put a network together of LMR, LTE, applications, and coexistence with existing and new applications. So that system integration role is also an important aspect that needs to be looked at when we look at next generation public safety networks. And the last one, of course, is a question of the way networks are designed with Tetra or P25 is different than the way networks are designed for LTE. It's very adaptive, very specific to what kind of applications, use cases that the public safety wants to do. So a system design, implementation, maintenance, that will be a very challenging task as we go ahead. I think that also has to be taken into consideration.
So coexistence, parallel use, handling the complexity, integration into various other systems which were not necessarily relevant in the narrowband era, and you know, fundamentally looking at the system design in order to have it addressing the future. Right. So that's coming from the industry side. So how about from the operator side? What can, say, Antti, what can an operator bring into facilitating on one side the industry, bringing the technology, and on one side the needs of the end users on the field demanding that, look, we want to have everything in the world, but it needs to be available at all times, and it has to be secure, and it's not allowed to cost anything.
Well, that's the difficult question as an operator, being between the end user and the industries and the network operators. They see it's a difficult spot because we represent for the industry so small number of people, and so, and like Barbara said, that Germany and Finland are approaching difference from so different angles that the PPDR sector globally and especially in Europe is so fragmented that it's going to be difficult for us to reach a critical mass to be interesting to vendors. So I guess as an operator in between, what we need to do is line up and start talking to each other to want the same things roughly in the time scale, even though we didn't need them at that time, just to be more interesting.
So if I'm hearing right, you're actually saying that from operators' perspective, you really do need TCCA and the Critical Communications Broadband Group to bring the people together to discuss these things and find a common way to address our needs in this niche market. Was this more or less what I heard?
Yes, exactly.
Excellent. I'm so happy to hear that we are actually important. Barbara, what do you think?
I think you should look at what you have. I mean, in general, I would agree with Professor Laza, who said a proprietary network or private network is the safest thing, at least as far as the core network is concerned. So we're very happy with our Tetra network, which is, as far as the IT is concerned, and IT is about 80% of it, it's separate from the internet. We don't have any incidents there. We only have them in the access networks. So look at what you have. And we're doing this in Germany now, and then the buzzword is convergence. We are throwing together our core network with other functions like a nationwide government network. So it's the same sort of basic transport layer, and it's the same infrastructure you have. And these infrastructures, as I think everybody knows, are extremely costly once you start digging, because this is for many years, and this is very costly. So this is reuse your assets and try to finance or go towards the highest degree of security and also private ownership in the sense of government ownership by heading towards convergence and that also includes converging different sectors. So we're also talking to the utilities guys, and we're also talking to the transport guys, and we're doing a lot of talk with the military guys too. So I think for the future, as an operator who is operating a huge and very costly infrastructure that needs a lot of maintenance work, this is one of the most factors, you should look to unify your activities with other sectors or of the government or so-called critical infrastructures.
So you're basically saying that, say, Dubai Metro, potentially in Middle East, a very important oil and gas sector, as well as public safety, have very similar requirements and would benefit on working together, having similar concepts, and to the extent as possible, utilizing same core networks, transmission networks, and further solutions.
And not only share the antenna mast.
Yeah, you know, sharing going beyond just the mast. What do you think in Australia? Obviously, Telstra is promoting the lanes concept strongly and doing quite a lot of activities there.
I think so. Telstra is doing a lot of good work with lanes, and if you look at the Public Safety, the Productivity Commission's report, we will be going down that path. I think that's fairly obvious for us sitting in Australia. However, the government's target's 2020, so at the moment the conversation is really based around the notion of the 4G network. So if we go to a commercial carrier, as our first speaker mentioned, that's designed about high rates of download as opposed to upload, which is what we'll need. So we're talking, our operational requirements may not be adequately covered by the 4G network. I anticipate the 5G network, that will be an issue which disappears, and by 2020 we'll be talking about a 5G broadband network, or possibly 6G, who knows, the great work which is going on and the advances happening so quickly. But I think Barbara's point is critical about convergence. We don't know what the future is, but it will be certainly a network society, and the connectivity and convergence will be a key factor that we need to think about. And I think it's our attitudes. I think it was Einstein who said we can't solve today's problems with the same thinking which created them. So we need to think a new way of operating in the public safety space. So our public safety communications family, if you like, is no longer police, fire and ambulance. It's much, much broader. So how do we get past that attitude or the culture we've got built in that I'm a policeman, everything's important to me, and my need is more than yours, or yours, or yours. It's just not helpful. And what ends up happening is the police, fire and ambulance all compete against each other for the government's money instead of working collaboratively and saying, well, with the convergence of the service we deliver, what's the best value proposition we go to government on to get the money to actually go and invest in some of this technology? So yeah, we've got a long way to go in Australia, unfortunately, but your point you made before, rather jokingly, Terry, about the need for TCCA and these conferences is critical, because the police, fire and ambulance have to come to these conferences to talk to the vendors to actually build that trust and understand what's happening. Technology changes so quickly. We find it very hard with organised crime groups to try and manage the new challenges they face, let alone the communications area. So yeah, we definitely need to work together and build the trust between each other so we can work together to get better outcomes for that community.
All right, you wish to add? Go ahead.
No.
Okay, good. On now looking into the solutions, right? We are seeing we need to do convergence, we need to do policies, we need to probably renew a whole lot of core network backbone and so on. What are the three first steps one should actually look and do first? If you have say a Tetra network in a country, so what is the corner you should start eating the elephant?
So, well, the most important question is if you start evolving your network, going from Tetra to a Tetra plus broadband and eventually a broadband network, the first question is, do you have the spectrum and money to put a private network together? If there is, then I think there is a good way to start with a smaller network and then, or a smaller LT network, and then evolve that network over time, start at critical areas, evolve it over time, if the private network is there. Or as we see in Europe, there is this whole effort towards collaborating with the carriers, an MVNO network, a shared network. I think that one needs to start. You could argue that a lot of police officers, agencies do use broadband devices across the globe. They subscribe to a carrier, but that is not done on an institutional basis. It's few people, they subscribe to one carrier or the other. I think the first effort is to go and create this organization that is either a private network, shared network, or a virtual network. But that needs to start. So that's the first one. You have to embark on that as an institutional basis. The second one would be then identify the specific use cases that the particular agency, a country wants to use. And that use cases would then define what kind of applications do you need to bring in. And then get those applications, start introducing those applications into the network, because that takes time. As you do that, I think the third most important thing, and I think you mentioned it earlier, is the question of user adaptability and learning. The current users are used to a certain way of operations. They go to a scene, they know what to do, make a call, but now they go to a scene, they have to learn, maybe take a picture, send a video, whatever that particular activity needs to be. I think that change control takes a lot of time. So I think that also needs to be slowly start being inculcated. And of course, the fourth one would be you continue to grow on this, add more applications, more devices, more networks. I think that then you can grow, but I think the first step is to start one way or the other, a private network or a shared network.
So fundamentally, in order to reach a destination, you actually have to take the first step.
Sure.
Okay. On the operator user side, what do you think you would need to be doing? I mean, this is a great suggestion here. How about taking the first step?
I think it's a very dangerous proposition to ask the police or fire to recommend a solution. We should be concentrating on what's the capability that we need in the field for particular tasks. So we need to develop the language and the relationship so that we can develop a good user requirements so that then other people can work on the technical solution and then work with politics on how we convince government to invest in. But yeah, don't ask police to give you a solution, because we'll give you the latest, bright, dazzling piece of kit that we can see and say it's a machine that goes bing, we have to have it.
How do you think in practice one can actually verify the solutions from the industry, whether they're working? Does it have to be, production ready, and then the user says, well, this is otherwise good, but I can't use it? Or is there a mechanism that one could verify the concepts and develop them so that they would actually be ripe and mature by the time they're actually done?
I think from a user's perspective or police's perspective, we have to be mature enough to realise that we're not the experts in that field. So getting an independent person to come in and do those assessments, make sure the user test cases or technical test cases are conducted and are appropriate. So the independence of experts is a key step in doing that. The key features, of course, we always want is reassurance and risk management, so that there is good security provisions on the network, there's good business continuity plans in place, and it's a highly resilient network, even when you start losing a number of cells because of a particular type of disaster. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Terry.
Well, certainly it brings to my mind also a question that how much we as a community can be generating common test cases, obviously on different layers in terms of verifying the standard, whether the standard actually meets the requirements, if the applications and implementations are interoperable, but also certainly on the higher layers on mapping the use cases to the technologies, see that if those could do, that might probably be helpful for the mankind in that sense. Yes?
Well, I just believe it's important to maintain a dialogue with industry and progress in sort of an iterative way. Also, well, maybe starting with the standardization process and then interoperability testing, conformance testing to the standards and so forth.
Yeah.
And as far as the usability of devices is concerned, it makes a big difference between there's a big difference between network components and such things as end-user stuff. End-user stuff, end-user devices, you might be able to test yourself or have a company testing us. That's in our case in Germany. But with the network testing, that's something different.
Yeah, absolutely. Now,
add on that, when we go to whole of government solutions in Australia, what ends up happening is there's an agreement between a vendor and the government, and then the agencies fall underneath there. So as police, we might test a certain piece of the kit and be unhappy with the solution, but then we have to go and work with other agencies to try and negotiate a position to convince government, to convince the vendor that there's a problem. And from experience, we can highlight key challenges. Our ability to influence government and get a good outcome is something we need to work on, though, unfortunately.
Yeah, but one thing you shouldn't expect from the operator or the user is to tell industry what exactly in terms of future functionalities they need. This is just, you make up your mind while trying out things.
So basically you're saying that if you were to anticipate the impact of Google in 1990, you might not have been able to do so.
Yeah, well, more concretely, last week I attended a conference on 5G, and we were asked as users what we expected from 5G. No idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you like to make your final suggestions and remarks to the audience before I let Antti to make a full presentation from his side? Sunil.
The train towards public safety broadband has left. It's gaining momentum across the globe. The classic discussion of is it a private, hybrid, I think that one has certain local and certain constraints based on availability of spectrum or money. But I think that the general messaging across the globe is that public safety broadband is required, data is mission critical, and of course, the other stream is that countries who have LMR, they continue to say voice, mission critical voice is on LMR, as you said. There's a longevity of mission critical voice on LMR, and coexistence will be, or interoperability or convergence will be a key factor, a key play over the next 5 to 10 years.
Barbara?
I largely agree, I must say. Yes.
Seconded. Ged?
I think I agree as well. I think the public safety mobile broadband will be the biggest change to our operational environment we've seen in probably living memory. But the Tetra and P25 have got a very long future as we develop our understanding of the capabilities of mobile broadband from a public safety perspective. So it will be a very interesting journey. One of the things that I did back in Melbourne, the Melbourne University set up a new research centre, the Centre for Disaster Management and Public Safety. And we've got a key area, or team working on critical communications, or public safety communications. And have had some work with a few people in the room about looking at what is the future work from a multidisciplinary perspective, and to bring the government, industry and practitioners together to build the trust and actually work and start having some of these conversations on a more regular basis to get some outcomes and really help everyone work together to produce what does that future look like, how can we get the best out of the future.
Yes, okay, excellent. So with this, I'd like to bring this panel session to the end and let Antti to express his views during his presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.